All right, we're live, boys. Welcome to the stream, everybody. Everyone wants to know if Mikey has Bog with him. He's got the shirt.
I got the shirt. Right? The dog's I'm in my garage, so the garage is open, and he's such a vicious killer of a pit bull that I can't have him out here because he'll viciously go up and lick people when they walk by the house. So I look like enough of a clown with my garage open talking to a computer, dude. So I'm just going to.
All right, everybody. Today we are breaking down the topic of deep diving cranks and long lining, which is something that I think we all do, but we all do it in a lot different ways and on different lakes, right?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. I've got like a little outline here. I'm going to start running down some stuff that way we're not wasting people's times and whatnot. All right. So for starters, what is the difference between long lining and just deep cranking in general? What's the difference there? What's long lining versus deep cranking? Now, to me, it's long lining is when you're actually pulling out a lot more line out of your spool, whether you're drifting, whether you're trolling, whether you're under the outboard motor, and you're pushing out as much line as you possibly can in order to get your bait down further and keep it in the strike zone for a long amount of time. Is that pretty much what you guys think, or is there something I'm missing here?
No.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I look at it for two things. One, I look at it so long lining, and I'm going to put this in a video actually, but one, to get a crankbait deeper than possibly can, and two, to cover a longer area than what you can by casting, so to be more efficient. That's how I look at long lining.
Yeah, because that's one of the important things. Go ahead, Ben.
It doesn't even have to be deep water. Like you can long line in like 15 foot of water, but you can cover a ton of water, and you can basically have your bait all in the strike zone, whether that's on bottom or slightly off bottom. I mean, for a much, much, much longer period.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's one of the big drawbacks. So everyone knows deep crankbaits, they catch big fish. But one of the major drawbacks of a deep crank is you have to get it down to depth. So there's a certain amount of your cast that's wasted getting down to depth, and there's a certain amount of your cast that's wasted bringing the bait back up to the boat, right? So by long lining, you essentially can keep that bait down for even you got 150 yards out there, you actually get to keep the bait in the strike zone for a cast, essentially. It's going to be down there for, 60, 70 yards or so.
Yeah, it's awesome. I literally did this before I got cut up and had surgery. And that's literally the reason I did it, is because, like, there was a row of fish on a point that was, like, 250 yards long, and they were on the one side of it, on the top of it, and then on the other side, and they were like separate pods. There was like one pod on this ledge, one pod on this ledge, and some scattered ones here. And I'm like, screw this, dude. I'm not casting. It was 33 feet of water too, but I mean that's like a prime example. And you can do it. You know what's funny? We're gonna talk about crankbaits, but you can do it with a Carolina rig too, man.
Yeah,
it works really well with a Carolina rig. But it just being more efficient.
You can.
So when you have a fish that's on the outside ledge, on top of it, and then on the backside of the ledge, are you literally hitting the bottom before you get to the first, like, the rise, and then bring it up the ledge and then across and then fall back down the other side?
That's one good point is, like, for us, so going back to me specifically, long lining on the Tennessee River, a lot of time it has to do with ledges. So the way that you line up, or ledges are humps, the way that you line up on those to make your run, a lot of times what ends up happening is you can't really go shallow to deep because there's grass and, there's stuff that you can kind of get mucked up on the bottom. So you end up having to go deep to shallow. So what can happen is you have to really kind of time and understand distance, how far the bait's going to get down based on how far you have it out there, how far you are ahead of the school, so that you're not dredging bottom in 35 foot and running up through a million rocks to get into 20 foot. And then, your line's so banged up by the time the fish get a hold of it that you break off a big one. So there's a lot of it's just trial and error. I mean, that's the thing. I've thought about trying to figure out some kind of mathematical equation for, how far I have to be versus how long it's going to take for this crankbait to get down there so I can be more exact with it. But in reality, on the Tennessee River, the current's always changing. The water levels are always changing. The wind changes. So there's so many variables that it's almost like you have to just kind of line up on it, get a feel, a couple waypoints where you think it should work, and then go ahead and run it.
And that's something that I've noticed, long lining for me is two separate applications, right? Number one application is kind of what we were talking about a few minutes ago, where you've got like they turn the current off, and you got fish freaking everywhere. Whether they're from 25 to 35, and they're just like on these long drawn out points. You long line on those points and that kind of stuff. But then the other application is when the current is on, and they're and they're stacked up in these these certain spots, but they're really really deep. But I think long lining really, if you can get good at it and understand how that crankbait dies, what kind of crankbait you're using, and all that kind of stuff, line and all that, is when you can really start to optimize that time in the strike zone a lot better. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that it's really the last third of the cast is when that crankbait's at the pinnacle of its diving depth and where it's really going to get the most work done. Sitting off of those fish too much can sometimes hurt you. Sitting too close to them can hurt you. There's that sweet middle ground somewhere. And I think that's where like long lining has always helped me, is that I can pull it through there, and then it hits that maximum diving depth. And instead of being the last third of the cast, it's 2/3 of the cast. And I'm in that strike zone just longer and longer.
But it's so important to learn both. Like long lining, I feel like for us on the Tennessee River, it can make up for a lot of inconsistency, especially if you're on a new spot or you're on a new lake or you're practicing or something like that. But we know how these are all community holes. And if you're sitting there trying to long line something, as soon as you run through there, some dude's going to jump right on top of it. So it's like you have to figure out both. Like if it's a weekday, you might be able to long line a couple of times, but then you also have to figure out a waypoint or a lineup that you can actually make a cast with a bait to do the same thing.
So how much impact does having like running over those fish have on those fish, right? Like when you're long lining. I know, Mikey, you and I did it in Florida, but like, does it matter down on like?
I mean, it matters, but like in the end, long lining, you're gonna catch like if they're on it, you're gonna catch fish your first like 5-6 passes, and then anything after that is freaking juice. But one thing I want to throw in there quick, we'll run back to that. So I mentioned two reasons I long line. There is a third actually that I kind of forgot. That's literally something I did on Gunnersville before I got cut up. So efficiency in the sense of like covering distance, hitting a certain depth. But the other thing, and I know you've seen this, Caleb, on Chickamauga, is you can never move a crankbait faster or more aggressive than when you're long lining. And literally, dude, I've had a school of fish that I casted to and could not catch them, and we long lined them. And the way I jack it, dude, like freaking it with 6-2-1, like I'm going hard. Plus, you have the momentum like already built up by the bait moving. That bait's never going to move faster or humanly faster, unless you're pulling. And that gets reactions, dude. Like literally, sometimes you got to move the bait faster than you like is humanly possible in order to get them to bite. And that's another way you can use long lining. I've triggered.
You can't move it fast enough. I mean, I've had times when I'm idling way too fast. Like my boat, sometimes the idle gets whacked out on it, and it'll be idling at like 5 miles an hour. And dude, like they'll stroke it like that. You can't go fast enough with a deep diamond crankbait. And so that's one thing that comes in. But it can also screw you if you're actually going to fish a tournament, the next few days or whatever, because you're never going to be able to do that, like as fast as you can actually troll it with the outboard.
And it blows fish out too. Yeah. Like it's like the mag spoon of freaking cranking, dude. Like if you do that to them, like they're not going to bite for not only 2 hours, they're like not going to bite like for at least half the day.
Yeah, it's done for the day for us. Yeah. Like you break up the school within 5 passes, you catch, everyone who's out there catches a fish the first 5 passes.
Yeah.
Usually catch the biggest fish that are out there, and then it's done. It's time to go find another school. I don't care if there's 20 fish in it or 50 fish in it.
Yeah, and usually my experience has been
going back to the outline, like time of year. For me, and for I think a lot of you guys, it's only summertime. But I know Mikey, like you do this in the winter, right?
I think me and Ben did it when we were down. You're right. Yeah, we do it. But here's the weird part, though. Those Florida lakes set up exactly like Tennessee River summer, but in spring, or like late winter kind of deal. So it's like a different season, but it's almost an identical technique, pattern, and concept. It's all reaction. It's covering long schools or trying to get the bait so aggressive that they can't even handle it kind of deal. Hard bottom focus, stuff like that.
Exactly.
This is so interesting to me, man, because I'm thinking of this. Like, I've never really long lined some of this stuff because everyone always just drop shots or throws a tube or, maybe throws a little swim bait and gets it down deep. Especially in the summertime, you're talking 25, 30-foot humps where there's just a ton of rock. But that would be so ideal if I could literally start on one side of this rock hump and long line across the thing where I know all these fish are schooled up.
Yeah.
You got to be careful though, because when it gets too craggly, like you got to remember that bait's digging so hard, it will find every crevasse, if you will, to other people, and dude, it will wedge. The nice part is you can go back to the other side and pull on it, and usually it'll float or it'll pop out. But like, dude, if you hang a bait when you're long lining on any kind of piece of cover, you ain't getting it back, dude. It's gone because it's buried. There's always momentum,
Yeah.
That goes back to distance too. Like if you have a ton of line out, so say if you run across that rock pile, you spool out pretty much all your line, 90% of your line, and then you make that retrieve. I've noticed when you do that, you have a lot more tendency to get hung up versus keeping the line angle a little bit different by only running out, maybe depending on the depth, maybe you only run out about a 70 or 80 yard, just a little bit longer than a normal cast, right? You go ahead and you troll, you get that bait down to depth, you troll past where you're going to be, and then make the retrieve. That way, throughout that entire cast, basically, the crankbait's on the bottom. That's another way that I've done it in the past, and it seems like around rock specifically, it doesn't quite get in there because we have some nasty stuff. You get on some of these limestone ledges that are actually just a cliff that's been, covered over by the reservoir, and it's the same thing. There's like little veins in it, and it eats stuff. And if you long line too far, you'll eat up your line before you can even – you'll just be reeling, grinding, and all of a sudden you'll break off a 10XD, and it didn't hit anything, nothing happened. You just sawed your line in half.
So I'm going to jump in on this one. Like, all right, so I'm not saying I have more experience than anybody or anything. I've just done this. I've just done it a ton, and I've done it on easier places to fish, you could say. So, like, they're flatter, so there's less risk. I can do it a lot.
Yeah.
I kind of started, I like hedged 100% on my electronics. And it's not just for, when you're going over them, you want to see them on your front graph, and basically line up as many as you can and, lay the line over them. Because basically you're making it connect the dots. Like you got to keep it straight, but you're looking for all those dots or all those arcs and you're putting the boat over trying to make that line. Yeah. That's part of the reason too. First off, when I scan these schools, I'll make a queue. I'm not just scanning the front and the back because when we're long lining, we're putting out 100 yards or whatever, So I'm like dropping points every like 25, 30 feet. Yeah. So I have a streak. The other thing that I found too is so I have 0.1 and I also have my GPS set on my front unit so that it reads the GPS directly from like where the unit's at, but it also is off the 0.1 direction. So basically what I always do is I'll go and get the boat turned so I'm pointed at where I want to go. And oftentimes I'll overshoot it. So I'll look at my little, I'll press on my touch screen where the middle point of that school is. That will become like a little box on my Lowrance and it'll say how many feet away it is. So I always aim for 100 feet away. Almost no matter what, even up here. And basically I'll use that as a marker. So if I'm 200, I'm like, shit, I got to move up like another 100 feet. If I'm 150 feet, I'm like, I got to move up. Or
that way you're not on the bottom too long in bad territory.
Exactly. And I know the bait will get down. That 100 feet seems to be perfect. And then I also try to go, so I'll go down my line and then that depth tracker that distance tracker is still on. When I pass my last point or whatever, I'll look for approximately 100 feet when I get past it and try to keep that line straight, I think a lot of guys, they don't go far enough past. And the biggest fish in my experience are either on the very edge sides or just a little ways out or at the beginning or the end, And if you miss that beginning or the end, you miss fish. But that seems to be kind of the distance if you're just trying to like start with it. You can easily do that on your electronics, hit the button and you can see where you're at. But the straightness, maybe like Alex and I know Caleb, you can because the current's a big deal. Like you have to keep your line straight, like your fish line.
And, the current actually helps with that a lot because, I know that when we were doing that down there, it's important to play the wind. So you want to use the wind to your advantage to present the bait. So it's not blowing you because otherwise you can get blown off of that point. Now the current's the same thing, but I actually sometimes use it strategically. So I can actually start that drift and time it to where the bait is going through the school. I don't have to run directly over top the school if they're running a pretty good amount of current.
Right.
So you can get sneaky with it like that. And I will tell you, on Tennessee River, anywhere that has, if they're running maybe a mile an hour current or 60,000 or whatever you want to call it, like a fair amount of current, you want to start that drift about if you're going downhill, which is what I call going with the current.
Yep.
If you're doing a drift downhill, you want to start that at more like, I use my cast strings. I have a cheaper unit than you, but I have cast strings on there. So I do the same thing. I line up that school. I find for the bigger pods of fish on there. I put my marks in there. And a lot of times in the summer, I delete my tracks just about every time I go out on these schools. So I can use the tracks as a way to line up and get that same drift going. But usually I have to
leave your tracks or you leave your tracks?
Feet. It's about 150 or 125 feet in order if they're running a lot of current, because the bait doesn't dive the same when it's going with that current, unless you're running the outboard or something. But it seems like I can't troll fast enough to get it to dive as good, because it's like it's getting pushed on its back the whole time.
Did you say you delete your tracks or you leave them, Caleb?
I delete them.
Really?
So many times I delete them. I'll leave the points, and I use I color code points and use different weird symbols and stuff for schools. Every time I'm out there, I'm going to use different symbols for my tracks and stuff like that. But I like deleting the tracks so that I'm using the points, but I have a really fresh idea when I make that first couple drifts in there. If I catch a big line, I know exactly. It's not like a bunch of lines. Yeah. And Garmin's different than Lowrance. Like you have really small, fine tracks.
Yeah.
So that's not the big deal. Garmin has these big fat tracks. So it's like you run 5 times through there, it blows out your map.
I gotcha. Because I leave my tracks because usually, I don't have the greatest memory, but it triggers in my mind, because I'll have my points and I'll see my points and I'll be like, dude, when I did a 45 on that line, it worked, or something. So I'll have those lines kind of set up. And actually, so let me throw something weird at you guys. And once again, Alex, maybe you can respond to this. So the long line school I was on 2 weeks ago or so, they were pushing 30,000, 35. But I was actually catching bigger fish. I catch them each way. I was catching bigger fish against the current, which was really weird. And I don't know if that's because my bait performance was different or what, but it was a main river, so main river, dude. And literally I would go against the current and crank down and catch a 4-pounder. I'd go with it and catch a 2. And it happened 3 or 4 times, dude. So I don't know. It kind of surprised me, dude.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times what will happen is there'll be underwater eddies that we don't even know that are there. And when you go against the current, what you're actually doing is you're just running into those bigger, more isolated kind of rogue fish that find those eddy points underwater. And that's what you're hitting, because that's something I've noticed. We, outside of cranking the Tennessee River, Chick and Watts Bar and doing stuff with Caleb, I crank a lot of Highland Reservoir stuff that's very dependent on them pulling current through the dam. And it's not like a riverine system. It's just a massive, expansive reservoir, right? Like a Douglas or a Norris or whatever.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've noticed is kind of like that is that when they're pulling a lot through the dam, the bigger fish will sit against what would technically be the current, right? And I don't know if it's just because they're trying to get away from the crowd or if it's the pressure or they don't want to compete or what it is, but you can throw at it with the current, bring that bait, with how the current would come, catch a bunch of small ones and then adjust and go either diagonal to the current or back against the current. And that's when you'll find your big ones. And so, again, I don't know. It could be underwater eddies. It could be just the way the structure lays out or whatever it is. But it's a really weird kind of bite. And it's one of those things when the current turns off, and I was, kind of wondering, we're obviously probably going to get into this. Something I've noticed is instead of being on this, being on a car hood of the size of something, they get in like a football field size of something. And that's kind of where what I was talking about earlier, finding that in between of you know, when they're on the football field, I like the long line for them and kind of do what Ben was saying. Not necessarily long line for them to get down to a certain depth, but to just keep that bait in the strike zone as long as I possibly can, because I got to cover a football field of an area instead of trying to hit one rock pile or a tree or a ledge edge or whatever it happens to be. But no, I've seen that, Mikey. It's really weird, dude. I think it's underwater eddies because me and Caleb have talked about that before. And I mean, dude, even super shallow stuff that we've got on when the current's running, we'll be fishing, and like we'll go out around the edge of something and crank something back up against the current, and that's when we'll catch the big ones. And
or the boat will wash weird. Like all of a sudden, like you'll be going against the current, and then all of a sudden the boat's going like into the current without even hitting the troll. Like you can even see when you guys fish the dam, that shit happens all the time. You know, you told me about that, Caleb. Those what do you call it? Like the break or the chunk rock, like on the shore. What is that called?
Riprap.
Yeah, the riprap shorelines. You get like a secondary sort of back.
Yeah, you get an eddy pushing back up, and that's one thing. Like I'm a super huge proponent on this. Like when it comes to current, you need to go out and just like trout fish for a day. So you can figure it out, because anything, if you put a boulder in the middle of a trout stream, you have to think of it. So here's the boulder, and then there's a big dome around it. There's a pillow on the front. That's where the water's pushing back. So the current hits that rock, it pushes back, creates a dead area. Your most aggressive fish, trout, are going to sit in that pillow. You have the seams on the side that usually have what we call a flush, and where that current comes around and it begins to spin to make the eddy behind the rock. It creates two depressions right there in the flush. So a ledge is the exact same way. It's just got a little bit less current, but it's interacting at depth. So when you're running that bait across there, when it deflects off of that rock, it's going to get caught in that seam and it's going to get flushed, right? It's going to get flushed out to the side. Whereas when you bring it back with the current, or against the current, I should say, you can push into that dome, the backside of the eddy itself, and push right up against that structure from the backside. And I think honestly it surprises fish because they're facing this way, waiting on shad to come, and all of a sudden this thing just rams up behind them, you know, and it's like right in the zone, the easiest place for them to sit. And I think it just kind of throws them off their game.
Well, you're also changing the dive angle of that bait and the way that bait's moving. Like if that current's coming against the bait, right, that bait's diving a lot harder because it's being pushed, but you're also changing the way that bait's moving because it's either working like really, really hard and so it's vibrating really fast, or as that current's hitting it, it's causing that bait to almost blow out and it's kicking really hard to the side. So, I mean, you're really changing the entire action of that bait too.
And that speaks to the one trick that I figured out, and I'm sure you guys know it, for when you're doing it with the current, you know, because you have to accommodate the current. And this is where I'm not a tournament fisherman, so, you know, don't hold me to getting DQ'd or whatever, dude. But I'll go. So the whole thing is, you know, you troll down your line, and then you turn the boat back towards, like, up to your line, up to the bait, and you start cranking down, right? Well, I'll go with the current. And freaking, dude, I'll be at my 80-foot mark, you know, off of reaching 100. I'll start jacking that thing down. So basically, I'm riding the motion or the dude, my Newtonian is off. But you know what I mean? The motion, the movement of the boat for like 30 seconds or something, which gets the bait down, gets me a lot of, because we got to remember they're still stretching fluorocarbon. It gets me down and it makes that freaking fluorocarbon like a violin string, dude. It's taut. And then I'll gradually, and I found the slower the better, or even leaving the boat kind of maybe gradually good, like drifting in the current is best. But like just barely kind of slow the boat down, just so I'm not overpowering it, but really hedge off that last bit of trolling and that little bit of current push to kind of keep an extra amount of tension on the bait.
Absolutely. And that's where going past that mark and understanding how far to go past, because to me, I want that to keep that momentum when I start to retrieve that thing when it's already down on the bottom, right? And I get off of power, whether it's outboard or trolling motor or whatever it is. When I get off of power, I want to have that momentum going as I'm still getting to that strike zone. So right about the same time, so I can use some of that forward momentum along with my retrieve to get as much speed out of that as possible to get down to those fish and get them to go.
Well, not being tournament anglers, like, do you guys troll it at all? Like, you guys not say to yourself, okay,
that's
if I
one of the
have
topics on here.
if I have 100 yards of line out, like I get this thing down on bottom 100 yards away from where I want it to, like it's on bottom where I know I want this thing to like start to hit the strike zone, rather than me starting to crank it down
in specific areas or specific instances. Like, say I'm on a different part of the lake, or I see a new school. I'm just idling, and I'm looking around, and I see a school. I'm like, oh, you know. And depending on where they are and stuff, sometimes it's hard to see how big those fish are. I'll just turn around, toss out a plug, get it down to depth, and just idle through there with that plug and see if I can hook a fish, and then turn around. And it kind of gives you an idea of what's down there. If you hook a 4 or 5 pounder, you're like, okay, this might be a decent spot to actually put some time into. If you make 3 passes and catch 3 2-pounders, it's like, okay, move on, So it's just kind of a way that you can quickly figure out what's going on with the fish and stuff like that.
So something I've noticed, and this is kind of getting off the long lining thing and just into like general deep cranking. And it's kind of playing off what Mikey said. Is like I'm like a freaking bat out of hell when I start cranking. Like, especially when it's just normal deep cranking. Like I'm after it. Like, here I go. You know what I mean? Hard it as fast as I can go. And something that I've noticed, and especially like where bigger fish tend to be and where I've got bigger bites, is anywhere that I can find a depression in the bottom or depression on the backside of something. And this kind of plays back into the current and the eddies, because something that happens is if you do have something on the bottom and there's a lot of current, over time it's going to essentially dig a hole behind that piece of cover. Yeah. And those fish are going to use that hole. And some of the biggest fish I've ever caught are just absolutely grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding, hitting that cover, and you just feel that whoop down on the backside of that, and then just kill it and then go again as hard as you can. And after they kill it and go again, and it's like they try to take the freaking rod out of your hand. But I think that's something that people, they overlook, and everybody always says something to me about it whenever I make a deep cranking videos. They're like, dude, you are getting after that thing. Yeah. And it's like Mikey's. I mean, dude, you literally can't crank it fast enough. Like, honest to God, I don't think you could make that plug go fast enough that I think you could get it to the point where it's so fast that I think the fish would still try to chase it down and kill it, even though it's faster than they are. Yeah. Like, I don't know what that reactionary. I mean, what is that in deep water?
Yeah,
what is?
But here's the thing, man, and we do it all the time up here for walleye. Is guys troll, and guys will talk about trolling. Like, yeah, they want it really fast today at like 2.5 miles an hour. I promise, you're not cranking that bait like 2.5 to 4 miles an hour.
No way. No way.
But I've caught them like literally behind the boat with a plug out there, my rod bent over double at 5 miles an hour, and had fish knock the rod out of my hand.
But what is that? What is that? Is it just a pure reaction in that deep water that it's colder, it's darker, they can't see it as well, and so it just has to be that violent of an action to get that reaction?
I mean, they can hear it coming, so I'm assuming it's just zipping through there. It's like a fastball, and they just crunch it.
It's just a total reaction. They just absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean,
Mikey, you're muted.
You know how fast fish are. I mean, you can't. They're insanely fast, especially spotted bass and stuff.
You say like that, and you'll be trolling one behind the boat, and you'll come up, and he'll have it all the way back to his crushers. Yeah, I mean, exactly. So it's like you said, it's a reaction, but all at the same time, they're tracking that thing down and like purposely eating it. I don't know.
I mean, we've seen them shallow, dude. I mean, you see, like, every once in a while, you see them schooling in that, and how fast they move, especially spots, dude, when you see them all piled up. Like, they move so much faster than we can freaking even comprehend.
You can't troll fast enough to even like stay on a school of bluebacks. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Interesting.
All right, so going back to the outline here, we're all over the place, but gear.
Well, I think can I thread something in there real quick? Can I thread something in real quick? Because
go for it.
Alex brought up something cool. So, Alex, you're all into the trenches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially when this water is kind of slack, say like less than 20K, maybe like 15, 10, maybe probably more like 20, 15 or lower. So JT taught me this really cool trick. So for as many fish as there are that are like down tight, and you want it like grinding, there's also, when you have that slacker water, some fish that are up a little bit higher, and as we can see, when you're fishing like a jerk bait, like that cadence of, pause. Yeah. So JT taught me this deal where he's like, so when you're long lining, there's so much tension in the line that even if you stop reeling, the bait is still moving because there's so much momentum to go built into it. And it is the dumbest, most clowny looking game ever. And I don't know if it works, but I've caught fish this way, so I figured I'd throw it in. So you're cranking, you're grinding the bottom, whatever. So I do it more when I make a sweeping, grinding the bottom. You lift up, and we're using these my rod's 8 foot long. So like you point at your bait and you reach your arm out and you stop reeling for like a 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. You can even open your bail if you want. I wouldn't recommend it, but you literally just kind of, you sweep up line to the bait and to like right at it. And give it a second, and that pause will actually pause the bait and let it float up for just a second. You don't want it to too much because you'll lose contact. But for all those fish that are either tracking or looking for that pause, or maybe they are a little higher in the water column, I don't know, but I just know it works. It looks really, really stupid, but it works.
Yeah, I call that throwing slack.
Yeah, that's what it's called, throwing slack.
It's a common retrieve. It's like you sweep it like a Carolina rig, but almost like a hook set.
Yep.
Swing that thing as hard and fast as you can while you're still reeling, and then throw slack back at the bait. And it's usually about a 3-1,000 or so. Yeah. And then you go to start retrieving again. It just,
I mean, Caleb, how many times have I done that? Like, just be cranking. I mean, you hit it like you're almost setting the hook. I do it like I'll be cranking and I'll hit it like I'm setting the hook and then just go back to it. And I've seen what that bait does. I mean, it literally is going, and it just goes woof and like stops and kind of flips back and then goes again. And that like throwing back like that, I think you're right, suspended fish. And I think that's what I'm targeting kind of in that slacker water when I'm talking about like where you find anywhere there's like a ditch or a dip behind something. You know, whenever I grapho those fish, I can see them. Like they're dotted all around whatever that is. And then there's a few that are tight. But that kind of gets back into like the difference between the current being there and the current not being there. You know, and a lot of what I deal with, unfortunately, deep cranking, there's no current because it is that Highland Reservoir kind of stuff where I am dependent on man, not nature for current. So,
are you guys always smashing bottom with your bait, like intentionally hitting bottom? Because like that's the thing up here. Okay. So like up north, let me make this point really quick. Up north for smallmouth, I don't want to actually touch bottom. Like if I'm hitting bottom, I'm probably not going to catch near as many fish, or I just barely want to hit the top of the rock. And the reason for that is obviously because most of the bottom is rock, but also because those smallmouth are up like sight feeders. They want to be able to see it, come up to it and react. And so like by nature, I'm able to take that bait, and because there's not that much tension on that bait, can just stop my retrieve and almost point it to that fish. And as soon as that bait stops and I go to start it again, that fish already has it. Like I can't even actually start the retrieve again before that fish has it.
So this is a big retrieve around here that like I don't think a lot of people utilize at all. And we do it, you know, when we're smallmouth fishing around the dams and stuff. It has nothing to do with bottom contact. Sometimes cranking doesn't. When you're speed cranking, burn stopping, like you'll be sitting in 20 foot of water, casting to the bank and using the DT6, right? For smallmouth and stuff in the tail race. You can do the same thing on ledges. So say you pull and you idle a ledge and you see that the fish are up. They're hair jig fish or they're swim bait fish, right? Scrounger fish. They're sitting up off the bottom, chasing around bait. They're still cranking fish too. Like you turn around, like I always have some cranks rigged up. So I'll be in a 10XD spot, but I'll have a 6XD on with heavier hooks that'll float slower. And basically what you do is you just burn that thing down. You start making casts and you're burning that thing down to depth. You're never touching bottom. You know, you're 10 foot, 12 foot up off the bottom. But you're again, that cadence thing. It's just ripping through there. You're pulling it, stopping it, pulling it, stopping it. You're trying to get it just to wash out and hunt. And the fish will crush it like that too. You can fish a deep diving crank for suspended fish. You know, it completely goes counterintuitive to the whole dredging bottom that everyone talks about and deflection.
I totally don't do that. I used to catch fish up north like that, but I don't do that down here at all. It might be something to try. The only comparable thing that I have for you, Ben, and it has nothing to do with long lining, but we used to take – this is way back in the day when like a 10 or 12 diver was like your deep crankbait. Yeah. So when I lived up north, we would crank milfoil beds like that. So you got a milfoil bed, you know, they go down to say like 18, 20 up there. So you'd get on like your softer taper edges, not the ones that are like real rock solid. And basically it was just like ripping a trap, or you'd rip a square bill on shallower grass. and we'd long cast it, and you'd crank it down, and you'd feel for that one freaking little like branch or leaf to hold on. You'd make 2 pops and let it float up for like a foot or 2. You use plastic ones, like super buoyant ones, and then you make like 3 or 4 cranks, and you'd feel it just barely kind of hang. You'd pop it a couple times and then go. But I've never done anything like that long line.
If there's any northern guys watching this, and this is something that'll work on Gunnersville and Chick and places with lots of grass, there's some special northern crankbaits that are made to crank in the grass. And you take this bait, it's balsa, big bill, crank it down, and you get it in the grass, and then you boom, boom, and you pop it out, and you hit it hard. Okay?
I want to say that one more time.
Like you hit it, it's
one more time. There it is.
So you hit it hard, but you actually have to do that to clear the hooks. And then it'll run true, and it'll come back up, and you crank it back down and hit the grass, and you hit it hard again, and it's made to do that. Like the whole bait is intended to do that.
Well, what I was going to say,
it's a deal up north for sure.
What I was going to say is something that I have caught some absolute freaking giants doing is at the end of the cast, don't just crank that bad boy back to the boat. I pop it all the way up out of deep water. I mean, I just and then like let it sit, nut, and let it sit, nut. I can't tell you how many 5-6 pounders I've caught doing that crap that you're just going, and I guess they're following it. And when you start cranking that thing up and just giving it a pause, you'll crank up one time and it cranks back down to the bottom. So just a thought, but I know you're wanting to get back on the Google sheet and keep going out down the framework.
Last thing I'll mention to Mikey is try that like the up in the water column speed cranking on your fish at Smith Lake. Spotted bass really like that. If you find them out suspended, and they're schooling and stuff, just find a crankbait and burn it down through there. All right, so gear. Going back to gear. Ben and I had a conversation about this the other day. I am all about like a long rod, graphite rod, and I use either copolymer or monofilament. That's my deal. And again, like a 6 gear ratio. Mikey, you're paused. You're muted, bro. There he is.
I got nothing to say. I'm just actions speak louder than words. I'm just dangling my shit. I got the same thing. I'm not copolymer. In an ideal world, I'd use Sunline, SC Sniper, and I used to use it more, but I'm trying to not be poor. So,
amen.
But lowest stretch fluorocarbon you can find. I got a 621. I got kind of a cool reel handle, selfless plug. My buddy makes them down in Fort Lauderdale. But it's like this oversized handle. They actually use them for swim baits a whole bunch. But it's a giant handle. I don't even know. I could probably tell you. Whatever. It's extra big. But 621. This is an 8-foot 6-power composite. So it's graphite and fiberglass. Fiberglass sucks. 10 years ago, all I would use is fiberglass, but fiberglass sucks because you don't get any kind of bottom transmission. You'll never lose a fish. Don't get me wrong, dude. I have a glass rod that I give people that come down and fish with me who don't have a cranking rod to use, and I'm like, haha, you got to use, and then they land like an 8.5 pounder, and they've never caught a crankbait fish before in their life, and they're just sitting there reeling. I'm like, how the hell do you do that, dude? I lose those jerkers. So,
I think when you transition into deep crankbaits, now I'm a glass rod guy through and through. Me and Caleb have knockdown drag fights about this. But listen,
no glass in my rod ever. Thank you.
Glass for shallow crankbaits. Now, when you're talking about deep crankbaits, you got to have some ass in that rod. I'm sorry, but I mean, if you hook one on a 60-yard cast, you got to have something in there to get those big, sometimes number 2, 1/0 size treble hooks in their face. So that's the misconception.
That's the misconception here, dude. Is like,
oh my god,
what we're talking about is not necessarily like straight glass. The composite, the benefit of this is like you have the graphite that has the butt in it, but then you also have the glass that gives that rod enough bend to like help keep these fish pinned.
He literally said what I was going to say, but it's more work.
I'm sorry.
Can I de-escalate the situation really quick? And this is totally off topic, but you guys are on TikTok, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So there's some dude that goes to like baseball games or something. You reminded me of this with the rod having like some ass to it, you know? So he goes to these baseball games and he hollers at outfielders, dude. And he's like, ass or titties, right hand or left hand. And the guy, so there's one video and the dude is sitting there and he's like, ass for right or right hand ass, titties left. And it's like this dude in the outfielders and he kind of like shakes his head and you see him from the back, you know? And he goes like that, dude, freaking, he's all ass. So this day, it was priceless, dude.
I'm gonna go to pro tournaments and be like, right hand for glass, left hand for graphite.
Yeah, exactly.
Ben,
I mean, for me, so my deep cranking rod has no glass in it. I don't want any glass at all because I want 100% bottom transmission. I want as much sensitivity. I want to feel when I'm going to get a bite. You know, I want to call my shot and be like, oh, that's the bigger shell. Oh, that's the bigger rock. That's what I need. You know, that's where the fish is going to be. But again, I also use that copoly. You know, I'll use the P line and stuff. Like I've gotten away from that. But when it comes to mono, like that Maxima is probably the lowest stretch mono that you'll have. But it's still really cheap. So you can re-spool every time you go long lining because it gets chewed up like crazy on our ledges and stuff. But I don't know. I guess if I was running 100% fluorocarbon, I could go with a composite rod, but for me, it's all graphite.
Well, that's kind of where I think there's that middle ground. I mean, like my cranking rod is a lot more graphite than it is glass, obviously, right? I still get those benefits of the parabolic. I still get that nice load. I still got that ass to drive the hooks in when I need it. But I think I crank the copolymer too, and I think I do something a little bit wild sometimes. When I want to take a 25-foot diving plug and I want to get it down to 30 foot, maybe 35 feet, I'll fish 8-pound copolymer because 8-pound copolymer is like 12-pound fluorocarbon.
Yeah,
I mean
exactly.
the crap's well rope. I mean, CXX 8-pound is literally like fishing 12 or even 15-pound fluorocarbon in some cases, just because it is so abrasion resistant and ridiculously strong. Yeah. And so I've seen sometimes, and I don't do it as much as I do anymore because I don't, I'm a river rat, so I don't go deep cranking like I used to. But we would take 8-pound, CXX and load it up on a reel and long line these fish and be able to get a 20-foot diving plug before they were making the 25-foot divers and the 30-foot divers. We'd get a 20-foot diving plug down to 30 feet. And be able to catch those fish. And so, I don't know. It's interesting. The gear side is interesting. I want to hear reels. I want to hear opinions on reels because I have my opinion on reels, but I want to hear y'all's opinions on reels. Mikey, I can't hear you, buddy.
Mikey, unmute, bro.
Dude, I'm terrible about that. Like, you can tell I'm great on social media. It was real quick, though, for anybody who's like starting to do this, play with your line sizes, but I can tell you by experience, I ran a lot of 10-pound Sunline, which is practically like 8-pound any other line. Like, it's super thin diameter. And yes, dude, I could get like my 6XD like stupid deep. But the problem you run into with long lining is, one, your rod guides nicks your line, whether they're totally integral or not. So like you can blow a spool on 2 trips, dude, because there'll be these random nicks like 100 yards down your line and that. And then the other thing that happens, dude, is you do get professional overrun a little bit. Just like, cause you got your spool totally loosened up, you're letting it out and it rolls. And dude, the difference between, I run 12 almost exclusively on 6XD and 10XD size stuff now. And the 12 just seems, I can make a little boo-boo and like overrun my line a little and it doesn't nick or fold, dude, you start playing around with that 8 and 10 and you can blow freaking $20 a line in like 2 minutes. So just kind of like a little,
be very careful.
Yeah, functionality versus perfection.
Like I think someone starting out, I think that copolymer or a low stretch mono is the way to go because you can literally just re-spool every time you go out there. You can get 600 yards of it for half of what it costs for a spool of fluorocarbon. I think the main thing, like going back to reels, the main thing for me is big spool capacity and a decent size handle on it like Mikey has. Like, I want a full body reel. I don't want any little compact reel. I don't want a low profile reel. I want like a You know, for me,
You want
my
some ass
cranking
to
reel
it.
is a
Yeah, I was just
actual
gonna say you
lube
like your
BB1.
women like little body.
Yeah, a little bit of ass
You know what
to
I'm
it.
saying?
This is all, dude. All
I'm a
fishing
big
is
dog,
just
really.
like sexual innuendo, dude. If you talk to a girl, it's all like us playing around with our rod. What are you doing? Going out with the boys and playing with your rods? It's like, oh my god, dude. Like,
So what's a gear ratio though? I want to know y'all's gear ratio opinion.
can I ask a question about your gear ratio? Does anybody throw any like 7.2-1s or like 7s?
I can't find one that won't wear me out. Like if I could find one with a big enough handle and was geared in such a way that it wouldn't wear me out, like for me, a 6 is kind of like the perfect medium. You know, it's like
I'm that close to trying a 7, dude.
Yeah,
Because
I just got my
I'm
hand
still-
on. I just got my hands on a Ike series. It's a 6.6-1, but it's super big spool. So I think it's actually like this is the line pickup capacity on the reel handle. I should have brought it. But it's a super big spool, so I actually think it's going to pick it up faster than like a normal smaller 6.6.
Yeah,
I might work. So I used to use a 5.2-1. JT, once again, thanks to him, he always used 6.2-1s. I started doing that, and especially, you know, Ben, you fish those big fish with me. Like you got to move the bait fast, and then you also need to be able to be super responsive. When you start dealing with fish like over 7-8 pounds with a crankbait, like they'll dart, they'll whatever, and you got to be able to pick up the line fast. But I've had some experience up here, kind of relating back to our original or early on conversation with moving the bait so fast that it seems unrealistic, where I feel like with that 6.2-1 or whatever that Sitka is, I'm not moving the bait as fast as I want. Like you can tell by the way your rod feels, you know, like the rod isn't as bent and as contorted as when I get bites. So like I'm trying to mimic the way that rod is like bending and the bait is chunking and I can feel it go like, and I can't always get it there with that 6.2-1, especially with current. And I'm wondering if it might be a good option to try to go to the 7.2-1. I know it's a no-no and all that, but I'm kind of there.
I think what Ben's getting at is a really good point because, you know, like spool size diameter makes a difference on how fast you're taking up. Like if you have a spool that runs down to a really small diameter, the beginning of your long lining retrieve, you're not doing anything. You know, you get like a 3-to-1 gear ratio, and it gets better as you get the bait closer to you. But I wonder, it'd probably be worth doing some research on that to figure out, you know, what's in that 6 power, but what takes up the most line per, you know, handle turn. What has, you know, like a really strong feel to it, or I guess it's geared lower, I should say. You know what I mean? Like I want it to turn easy because it's work. You know how deep cranking is work, dude. It's like, it is a workout. Like if you do that for 4 hours, hats off to you. Because for me, it's like, you know, I can do it for 2 or 3 hours. I'm gonna do something else. I'm gonna throw a scrounger for a minute, and then I'll get back at it.
That reel's picking up 27.6 inches of line per turn. Now let me see like what a 7-speed standard reel does.
So I'll throw something in between
inches.
on there. We were talking about like hedging graphs and stuff. You know, if you don't have all that technology, one real easy way that I do it, and it takes a couple times to get it right. And before I had that 0.1 and all that, I use backing as a signal, kind of like the old trolling guys do. They'll actually mark line. So I put like, and I don't measure the backing, but I kind of know how much it goes on the spool. So I'll be like, dude, if I put a 1/4 inch of like 10-pound or 12-pound mono as backing on this spool, I know I'm going to have, say, like 120 feet or 250 feet. Well, I don't know what the number is, but I know like, so if there's that much mono, there's that much fluorocarbon. And I know that much fluorocarbon is good enough to long line 300 feet or something like that, or 200 feet. And that's a way too, because you have your little double uni or whatever you tie your lines together with. You know, you can put that line out there, let out line, and when it goes tick tick through your rod guides, you're like, all right, dude, time to engage and start cranking down.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so BB1 7.1 picks up 31 inches of line versus 27.5 for the 6.
I mean, that's splitting hairs at that point.
You gotta wonder that. I don't know, like, because for me though, like,
inches per turn.
How many times are you turning that handle though per second? You know what I mean? It's like if you're running that thing like this, and then you add in, 3 inches per time you do that. What is that per second? You know, say you turn the handle 4 times a second or 3 times a second, then you're anywhere from 9 to 12 inches more that bait is traveling. So, I mean, that could.
I don't even think it's about how much more. It's the tension. Because once you get that bait down there, dude, unless you just sit there and you don't reel, like it's not coming up. As long as you keep tension on it. So, like for me, it's more having. It's kind of like having like a V12, like versus like a V6 or something. So like the V6 will get up the hill, you know, but so will the V12. And once you get up the hill, the V12 then has another freaking X amount of cylinders to give, and you can keep going. It's not that you're going faster; it's that you have more, and it's sort of counterintuitive because you more power. You know, you really don't have more power, but you can keep more tension on that line to sort of keep that bait settled right on the bottom and grinding easier. I don't know, dude. I need to try it before I talk about all this.
Well, Eric Morton, he said you guys might want to look into some musky reels. I have Alexa 300 711 with a power handle, and my new cranking setup that'll be arriving soon, which was recommended to me because I was started asking, I'm getting some new gear, and I was like, I'm wanting to mess around with some different deep diving crankbaits. I'm wanting to go a little bit faster. And what I'm actually getting is a multi-species musky like big bait reel, and it was for that reason. It was like you can get that higher gear ratio, but this thing's built with bigger gears. Like it's just an overpowered beast, so that you're not wearing yourself out. And it's kind of what Mikey was saying. It's the difference between a V6 and a V12. You just got more power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's what I was thinking of too, is going to a lightweight 300 size reel, because again, you increase spool capacity, but you increase spool size. All the gears and stuff are bigger in there. So you might actually, with 300 size reel, you might even be able to go to 8-to-1. Who knows? And still get the same, ease of the cranking itself.
You guys must have really big like man hands, because I have little like fairy hand. Because for me, there's like, for how much we do that when it's on that long lining bite, like you were talking about, Caleb, it's what do you call it? Like not effort, but like you get exhausted. I don't have words tonight, dude. But basically though, like my hand gets like cramped up enough. And that's like a little, I think it's a 2000 or 2500 size reel, like your standard. And if you go to that big reel, just the management, there's so much there. You got this 8-foot rod, you got this giant reel, and then you're trying to like manage this bait. At least for me personally, that'd just be too much, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
I got bare hands, so I literally like bare grip rod. I'm just like,
Alex with like a normal size bait caster is hilarious. It's like, where's the reel at?
Yeah, it disappears.
I'm not like, I have delicate fingers.
I have delicate fingers. Gotta moisturize.
But you know what?
I'm like the most out of place.
What's that?
I was gonna say I'm like the most out of place here. I'm like deep cranking to me, and we talk about deep cranking and long lining. Like, dude, this is like if I'm getting cranking in 17 foot of water, that's like, damn, you crank that thing deep up here. Oh yeah. Yeah,
you'd think you'd have the deepest cranking fish ever because of the clear water and the availability of the deep water in that.
Yeah, but it almost gets so deep that it's ineffective. It's like too deep.
You get
our ledges are very much like straight up and down. It's like
that's true.
Yeah.
Versus like the Great Lakes where I'm fishing super flat everywhere, and like a 2-foot depression is a big depression.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like a lot of your lakes, it seems like they are very flat. Like you get on a lake and there's not as many contours except for those smaller lakes, and by that point there's so much dive to it. It's like trying to fish a crankbait down a bluff wall, which can be done, and I've caught a lot of good fish doing that, deep cranking on the edge of the bluff. It's just all about the lineup at that point.
Yeah.
One thing I think that needs to be mentioned for anybody who's like looking into this, and I've been not a victim, but like I always try to get cheap stuff, dude. And like you think about crankbait fishing, and it's like you're being soft and playing the fish, and that when it comes to this deep cranking stuff, you do need like decent gear. You can't get away with like $100 reel or like a $60 reel. Like it doesn't work. Like the gears won't hold up. They'll grind. I got these old Shimano Aciticas, dude, and they were when they used to make them like highly durable. Like this was $100 reel back then, but now like with the way price points have like increased, my recommendation is I don't care what reel it is, lose freaking Shimano, whatever. But if you're not spending like 150 or more, that reel is not going to hold up. You can't use your square bill reel.
Brutal.
Yeah.
It is brutal on gear. I mean, absolutely. It's probably one of the most brutal techniques that you can use on your fishing equipment. I mean, it's just like
I always tell people this is definitely like when you start getting super technique specific, and I consider deep crank and long lining super technique specific. You got to spend more on gear. It's just the way it is. Spy baiting is another, thing. Like if you really, really want to get into spy baiting, you're gonna have to spend a little bit more on gear. Or like if you're into like map punching, like you are, Mikey. I mean, you go out and you buy a $99 reel and try to go punch a map with it, you're gonna probably blow the back wall out of it within the first couple of trips. It's so Mikey is totally right. You're gonna have to. If you want to do it, you got to invest into it. But I believe if you're at this point in fishing, when you're out there with the rest of us dodos in the middle of the lake doing circles, trying to find these fish on a ledge with a graph, you're probably willing to invest a little bit in some cranking gear.
So let's see here. Pushing on to another topic, I think we've covered, honestly, a lot of the things that we've got in the outline over here, just kind of in a different order. But one of the big things I want to talk about is what kind of offshore structure you guys are looking for in your lakes. We've kind of already talked about Tennessee River. Everyone knows it's ledges, it's humps. And basically all that is, it's the original river channel before it was flooded over and became a reservoir. It's the original channel. It's the structure that is on that channel, whether it's inside turns, outside turns, humps, little depressions. There's all kinds of things that fish sit on out there. But like Alex talking about highland reservoirs, it's completely different. For you, it's a lot of points, isn't it? Points and secondary points?
Points, house foundations, those are huge. I've caught more. I have more deep cranking spots from old house foundations before they flooded the lake. Man-made like rock piles and brick piles and stuff like that, where they'll build a bridge. And those guys, what they do is they just take those rocks and they just pile them up somewhere offshore. And like after they build a bridge or do riprap or something like that, a lot of the stuff that I used to crank that was like brush piles and trees is actually gone now. And it was something that you don't think about, but like 15 years ago they were there, but now they've literally just dissolved into nothing.
Yeah.
But highland reservoirs, man, it's a lot of long points. One of the big things I always, and this was funny, is something we used to do was you can literally go and look and see where the old communities used to be and usually graph those areas and find 2 or 3 house foundations. And it's kind of weird because it's somebody's life that used to be there, but like there's life there now. And like that's where the fish want to be. And it's usually something that relates to like a river bottom or a creek channel or something, because those people lived in that area for a reason, whether it was for the water, whether it was close to something they needed, but it's usually on some kind of, transition or something like that. You'll find a house foundation that's on an old creek channel or old creek bed. And that kind of stuff, man, highland reservoir fishing that's literally where they live. If you want to go deep crank, that's the kind of stuff you got to go deep crank.
And I've noticed just, a lot of highland reservoirs, to me, when I think of a highland reservoir, I think of these lakes. They're natural lakes that are, in the mountains. So you have all these ravines, all these ridges and stuff that are all coming together, and the creeks that finger off into there. So it's just point after point after point after point. Main lake, and then a million secondary points on every little creek channel and stuff like that. And to me, one of the hardest parts about that is finding the fish, like getting on a pattern, because not all of them have fish, not all of them have the right fish. And I feel like that deep diving crankbait is a way that you can pull up and just make like 3 casts quick once you idle, the crest of that, and you can find fish fast with it and cover a lot of water. But you're fishing like 50 points a day kind of deal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, most of the stuff highland reservoir around me, it's like you pull up, you cast at it 5 times. If they're going to bite, they're going to bite. If not, you leave. And it's hitting very specific things. And it's almost like, we talk about swim bait fishing. You got to have the right set of conditions. The wind's got to be blowing the right way. The current's got to be right. And highland reservoir deep cranking is definitely that. They got to be pulling the right amount of current. The wind's got to be blowing the right direction. It's got to be a certain time of day. It's very timing oriented. And so like you go and you hope to hit that exact kind of moment, timing deal, water conditions and everything like that. And that's why I've not done any deep cranking this year, on any of the Highland reservoirs, is because they're not pulling any water through the dams. They back the lakes up to get ready for Memorial Day, and they're just kind of done. And so as we wane on, though, later on into the summer, like real late summer before early fall, what will happen is we'll have those transition of fish that will start to move back up shallow. Well, the first place that they hit is some of that deep cranking stuff, those house foundations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they start to pull that water. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding how the current works when they start pulling the water through the dam, finding choke points, finding areas where water bottlenecks down into something, whether that be a bridge pylon or a creek channel swing or something like that. You're going to have to find an area where that current bottlenecks down. And if you can find that, you're going to find the fish. And I think that helps to eliminate a lot of stuff, because you are right. One of the biggest obstacles, and I got some buddies, Anthony and Michael, that's something they're struggling with right now, is they're just like, man, we want a deep crank, but we don't really understand where to start. And I'm like, well, you got to find that area where those fish are forced to be there. They're forced to set up on it a certain way. And if you can find that, it helps to isolate those fish a lot better than hitting a point that's, 35, 40 feet long, that's, real long and terrapin, that those fish could be sitting anywhere on that thing. So,
well, and that's the hard part too, is like right, Alex, those fish that you fish for, they don't leave those spots. Like if you graph over it, you're going to see fish on them, but it's just how spread out are they and like where are they at on it. So like understanding, okay, there's a rock pile here that when it's good, like you can graph and you can see your 5-10 fish on it, or you're going to see 2 fish on it and the rest of your fish are scattered out around it and they just get really hard to catch and they get funny.
Yeah, and until the current turns on, and then they go from being, like I said, in an area like a football field to sucked right down onto one rock pile that's the size of the hood of a car, which is as hard sometimes, because sometimes you got to cover just a crap ton of water to get them to bite, and then other times you're trying to line up the perfect cast. You're like, you see that yellow house, that cedar tree, that bluebird nest, and their old Jim standing on his back porch, and you got to get everything all lined up and make the perfect cast on it. But yeah, it's all about just number one, finding the fish, because they're not going to leave. But then number 2, understanding how the current, the wind, everything is going to position. So even sunlight. I mean, I've seen days when early in the morning they'll bite at high noon when the sun's directly on their head, and they'll bite right before the sun goes down. But any time in between those 3 times during the day, they don't want to eat. And I don't know if it's just the way the shadows are cast on what they're sitting on, if it's the way the sun cast off, a structure near them, or what it is, but they just don't want to. And so Highland reservoirs are different, though, man. That's a really weird type of deep cranking, and the people who are good at it they whip ass and take names. I mean, they're really good at it. And so
Mikey, your lake is, your lakes over in Florida are a lot different. They're like, what would we categorize that? Is this a natural lake?
Yeah, they're natural lakes. I think they were kind of formed by either like sinkholes or I don't think there were glaciers down there, but they're a lot like actually the lakes Ben has. Interestingly enough, they're kind of like glacier, kettle moraine-ish, like the old natural lakes that were formed where they're this giant scrapes in the land, and they're pretty flat.
Yeah, and so out there, it seems like when I was down there fishing with you, you're covering a lot of water. Those lakes, they're very gradual, it seems like, and there's not as much going on with the actual structure, like the topographical maps and stuff. But there's hard bottom in areas, and you can see where that hard bottom is. And so you're just cruising through there. And the nice thing about that lake, it seems like those fish kind of stick out like a sore thumb on your side imaging and stuff. You know what I mean? So like you're just covering water until you're finding the right size fish, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to graph them, but that also plays into it. Now that it's so beat up, it's kind of like up here, like you got to figure out little kind of unique ways to find them, or places where the graph see them as well. But yeah, that's why long lining and cranking is great down there, is because you do have these flatter structures, and you can use that crankbait to really transmit the bottom. So I get up on where I caught my 13 this past January. Like, there was an old brush pile there, and I marked a few down there. But what I didn't know is that there's a patch of about, like, at least from what I felt, like 30 feet where it's chunka, 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 chunka. And then there's a cast right next to that that's blowing sand, dude. And like, dude, if I made this, I ended up triangulating it. And if I made this one, and it's all open, like, you can't tell the damn difference.
Oh, yeah.
But if I made this one cast, that's where they were lined up, because that's where that bottom was harder. And then it would drop off a little bit, but there was like one little cast. And I don't know, it's about finding that bottom. But I've also, if you're talking about things that you've long lined, like, there's an awesome, and I've never seen it up here. I've seen fish around brush piles, but down there, like, all these dudes would fish the brush pile. And it's like, dude, bang the brush pile. And it's like, yeah, that's hot, but if you scan it, there's about freaking 30 of them swimming around within 10, 15 foot. So what I always used to do, these brush piles being like 25 to 30 foot of water, which is on that edge of like not getting much bottom traction with that crankbait, I drop a buoy on, usually you drop the buoy next to the brush pile. I drop the buoy on the brush pile, and then I use that as a waypoint to line up so that I could run long lining crankbaits like 10 foot outside at 15. And I lost a bunch. Don't worry, don't get me wrong, but once again, like, just making your lines perfect. I caught some big ones doing that. And then the other one is road beds, dude. We're talking a lot about like how we need current. Dude, one of my favorite bites happens like in about like 4 weeks, when they don't pull as much water if it's not raining, and you get these fish set up on these secondary ledges in these creeks. And what happens is these creeks are flatter. It's not like Highland, it's TVA stuff, but these creeks are flatter areas. So you get these expanses, whether there's a road bed there or a shell bar. But like you're saying, Alex or Ben, like, the fish are spread out. And it's a non-current situation, so they're kind of always there. But these guys fish these specific corners of it, and that, instead of going all the way across the whole damn thing. And it's a fun way to catch them, especially when they're not moving that much water. And the main lake ledges kind of suck. Like, these secondary things, they're easy to scan, like these road beds and these flatter kind of points. And I'm talking about literally inside a creek. Like, you go in the creek and it opens up, like you go under a bridge or whatever, and it's so much flatter. And these fish are just spread out, but these guys don't stop on them because they didn't see 10 dots in a row. They saw like 1 dot, 5 feet, 2 dots, 5 feet. And that's something. The other one too is when I see pods of white bass, dude. Like, it's so annoying because you'll catch 5 white bass to every single bass, but you can long line and get your bait under those schools of white bass and catch freaking mondos.
So I'll help you expound on that exact theory. So what I found, on the flatter areas like you're talking about in the backs of creeks, it's really important to find those, because not only can you catch fish now doing that, but like anywhere around Tennessee, like where you're fishing now in Alabama and stuff, those areas are dynamite in the fall when the fish start pushing back with the shad and stuff. Like, if you find those little sweet spots now, and it might be a 300-yard flat, and if you idle around with your side skin and just find the chunkiest areas, there might be 15 key spots there that you can just line up on and make casts on. In the fall, it'll pay big dividends. But another thing is that when you're talking about ledges in creeks, there's a lot of major creeks that are deeper. So, I mean, it almost looks like a small river system in itself, right? It's got a defined channel. It's got actual ledges on it. It's got turns and everything like that. I found that a lot of times those schools really get fired up, not only in slack water, but if you get a good runoff. So say you got a water coming in, pouring into the back of the creek, that's a great time to go fish those ledges that are in the creek, because a lot of times even though the dam is running out there and you've got current running out, say it's really rough out there, there's 5 footers, you can run into the creek, get into that kind of current and absolutely smash their lights out. They'll all pull to those areas once you find a couple sweet spots, and there'll be 100 fish, 200 fish schools in major creeks. So that's one key thing to find. Another thing is backwash. So say there's no water running in the creek, but there's a lot of current running on the main river. Say there's so much current, they crank it up to 80,000. It blows out the main river. The fish sit up on the bar and you can't idle them anymore. It's so washed out that in so much interference, you can't idle those fish anymore. Run into the creek where the current is getting backflowed, or on the main lake where you've got a secondary channel cutting up a flat, look there and you'll find those fish loaded up. And a lot of times they don't sit there all the time. So when you find them, it might be for a couple days, but they're not used to sitting there. No one's touching them, and you can absolutely knock their lights out like that.
That's so sneaky.
So sneaky.
So,
well, and
Mikey, I got a question for you.
Well, just throw this in there real quick. So those secondary things, like you're talking about, Caleb, those extraneous factors, like the wind is awesome because I suck at current fishing still. I'll just be perfectly frank. If I can find them on anything but like a current bite, I can probably catch them. But if it has to do with really analyzing current, I suck. So I got a lot to learn. But what's nice in those secondary creeks, like you were talking about, there's always fish. And I'm finding what you told me when I moved up here. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, Caleb. There's fish that live in them creeks. And they move around a lot, and a lot of it's based on wind, especially when you're talking about this offshore fishing. So these schools, instead of being current driven, if it blows out of the south, they'll set up on this 200-yard square in one way. If it blows out of the north, they'll set up on it another way. And what's great is everybody fishes where you bent the rod last week. And these old men or whatever will go to that corner of that spot. And like Gunnersville and Chick are prime examples. Like these days with all the pressure, like you literally have to fish your best spot and pick apart like freaking 20 foot and fish it for like 30, 40 minutes to even get that first bite sometimes. Like it's hard. Like it makes it difficult. But what happens is a lot of times, dude, you go outside these, especially community holes are a prime example. There's a place in Browns Creek like that, dude. Like you start scanning circles around the 5 boats that are sitting on this community hole, and all of a sudden you find this little micro school that's like set up because the wind's blowing in some direction. And dude, they're not going to be there, like you said, in 3 days. Like if you find them, it's like fish on a bed. You better catch everything and anything you can because, dude, you're not going to blow your load again on that same spot. Like, but you know what I'm saying? Like hit it and quit it, dude. Like and take full advantage of. But those pods move around, and they're actually really fun to find. Like I like fishing small. And it's a great way to say, I'm going to fish like 2 or 3 creeks today, and I'm going to pick those apart. I'm never going to touch the main river, the main lake, but you can find these little microcosms, and they don't last, but I like that game of scanning and finding and then doing, like I love that process. And it's a great way to do that process and not get all spun out because there's fish in this area or in this creek, and you just got to pick it apart and do your business,
And the work pays off. And that's the nice thing about a smaller creek or whatnot is like you can go in there, you can idle everything that looks good in 2 or 3 hours versus you could spend 24 hours, idling the main lake and might not find as many spots. And the cool thing is, like you were talking about in the creeks, there's usually a few areas that they're going to set in, right? So if you find the 40 spots back there that they're going to set in, depending on the conditions, you can go out there. Once you find it, years into later, you can go out there and be like, okay, the wind's out of this direction now. I'm scanning back into here. Oh, there's bait. Oh, there's bait that's broken up. There's schools of bait that are broken up. They're getting chased around by something. So what's my nearest spot to here, right? Boom, you're over there and you start catching fish. So you can really, like, putting in the work early on, you can narrow down so much faster later on if you're fishing the same body of water relatively consistently.
Mikey, I know you were talking about man-made cover earlier, about brush piles and everything, and all of a sudden you start to notice these hard spots, outside of the brush pile, or, when Jimmy comes and hooks onto your brush pile and moves it 30 yards away or 200 yards away, and then all of a sudden you still notice this hard spot. How much of that is actually caused because someone dropped a brush pile there? Like, these shells are getting pushed in there, and, like, they have to set up. I mean, we notice this all the time on our inland bodies of water where, like, there will be someone that drops a cinder block, and then all of a sudden around this cinder block on one edge or cinder block pile, there's no shell. And, like, I'm wondering if the same thing happens with those man-made brush piles down on that lake where a guy drops your brush pile and then someone moves it, but that shell is there because that's where it was pushed into by the current over the years.
So I got 2 perspectives on this. In my mind, so my videos are complete lies. Or they could be, based upon what my buddy has been telling me. So 2 things. One, yes, I do think shell bars develop based upon some cover that's down there. I had experiences when I initially started doing some of this offshore stuff. It wasn't cinder blocks, but I would find, that tubing, that black kind of ridge tubing that you use to extend gutters or do drain. So these guys would make freaking like loopy circles like a kid would crawl through, with this tubing. Well, that tubing, it lasts forever, but when you hang a spoon on it enough or you break it up enough, it breaks apart because you can actually move it, So there's a couple spots where that tubing was laid and it's gone, like long gone, like 2 years, 3 years gone, and there's bars under it. So I wonder if it's like what you look at as an artificial reef. You sort of stimulate or catalyze growth in some way and those shells show up. That's one aspect. The other thing that I've found is this. So I have a buddy, you guys can go check out his YouTube. It's Gino Losi. He's an absolute stick on freaking Harris chain, dude, like crazy killer stick. And he guides out there. And it's like sharing like your chick pics, like, hey, look at mine. Hey, look at yours. So we're sharing graph pics like that. It's like, hey, look at mine, look at your side scan. So we're like swapping them back and forth. I'm like, damn, dude, like your stuff looks a lot like my stuff. And I think these are shell bars because I pick up little shells and all this stuff. He's like, hold on, beer, watch this. He's like, dude, I'm convinced that these are limestone bars. And I'm like, really? Tell me more. So he thinks that a lot of these divots, I think I showed you, Ben, when you were down, like how
I saw them too.
Yeah, you saw them too, kid. I keep forgetting.
I thought they were springs at first. I was like,
yeah, they look like springs or brim beds, Alex. They're really funky, but they're like divots and they're super hard. You throw a crankbait on them and like it's like. So what I did notice, this is like this elaborate story. Every time we get a hurricane, I find new bars and catch more fish. And these new bars are awesome for like a year or two. Like literally the 49-pound bag we had was off a bar. We had a hurricane and a tropical storm the year before. And freaking this bar showed up and it was, dude, juice. That one got wrecked because everybody came out and fished it, whatever. But it showed up new. So I'm starting to think that, yes, maybe those brush piles and those artificial structures stimulate shell congregation, but then there's also a factor down in Florida where hurricanes and wind action, current, just like you'd find up here, actually reveal or wash away sand and sediment to create these limestone bars or whatever the hell they are, if they're buried shell bars or whatever, but they literally wash them out because I have no way of proving it, but I've graphed. So there's like 4 or 5 lakes that I graph and fish all the time down in Central Florida around Sebring. And I've been doing this since the lake started sucking in like 2016, I think it was. And I've graphed these whole lakes. They're not that big. I've spent time on like stuff shows up like, and it like literally, and the only thing I can think is either what you're talking about, Ben, where things are stimulated by things that are dropped, but in not all these places things were dropped. So it's got to be there's some kind of wind factor that's driving current and washing these areas off and creating these hard spots.
Yeah, and see, our bars change every year. Now the main ledges don't really ever change because they are limestone. They're solid stone, right? But a lot of the bars themselves or soft points and stuff, they change year to year constantly. But Nathan asked a really good question. He says, how much is shell indicative in high current areas of what fish will hold on? To me, shell is king on most of the lakes that I fish because I feel like where the shell is shell, all those little shellfish down there, they're filter feeders, right? So where they can be is where the current is coming to feed them, which means that current is coming to feed the bait fish, which means the bass are going to be there. So that's the way I think of it. It's kind of like a natural food cycle thing.
No,
which if that's the point too. Sorry, I want to say one more thing, Mikey. If that's the point too, when stuff gets washed out and stuff gets revealed, it's because there's actually more current there and stuff is washing over there more regularly. So therefore, the shell is actually there maybe just because that more currents flowing over that area.
So I can literally attest to that by the weather. So I love Alabama and the Southeast, and it's beautiful, but every single weatherman sucks fat. You fill in the blank. Like, you cannot read the weather to save your life up. I got stuck in a storm. If you guys actually go watch one of the videos I put up.
Yes, I saw that.
Dude, I've been in like a tornado down in Florida and I was scared and stuff, but I had a place to run. Like, dude, the weather is crazy up here and it's not super readable, But in Florida, it's kind of, you can kind of read it here a little bit, but I guess what I'm saying, so in Florida, when these hurricanes go through, like there's a staple of west wind. West wind indicates a front or indicates a large weather system. And what I found in Florida is literally on these lakes, like the west side of the lake has been washed out, and that's where these bars have showed up. And so when we have more weather activity, you get more of that west wind coming through, and at high velocity too. We're not talking about, hey, dude, it blew like 15 out of the west a couple of days and the storm went through or a front went through. We're talking like 25 to like 50, 80 mile an hour winds that create this huge sort of weather event and current event as well. And it washes these places off. So I think like that kind of is what has played into these formations, is this different direction of wind that's not normal. Because in Florida, it's north. Like you get a front, it'll blow out of the west for a day. Then it's north for freaking like a week or whatever. Then it'll start shifting east. And then, hey, endless summer, south, 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 south. So when you get those crazy weather events and you get that west wind where it's not just a one-day event of like 10 to 20, and it really changes the layout of these lakes.
What were you saying, Alex?
Yes. Shell. When we say shell, now I want to know what everybody's definition of shell is, just to clear it up for anybody that's listening to this. So when I think shell, at this point in the world in East Tennessee, I think zebra mussels, and then I think big freshwater mussels, and then I think actual like shell rock too. Because like some people who hear them say shell and they're referring to like shell rock, like that slatey kind of flaky offy kind of rock. But have you guys ever found or been able to tell the difference between like the smaller zebra mussels and the smaller freshwater mussels, and then like the big, like the big ones? Yeah. Because some of the best deep cranking I've ever found is when you can find those really, really big ones. Like when you hook one and bring it up, you know, they're the size of an apple.
You can feel the difference immediately if you run the right cranking setup or the right Carolina rig setup. You can tell, because a lot of times on these shell beds, so when I'm talking about shell, I'm talking specifically about, you know, an animal, right? Some kind of little organism or whatever. On these big shell bars, there's almost
aren't they
always,
called cephalopods? Cephalopods?
Yeah.
Cephalopods.
There's almost always an area that has that bigger shell on it. Those like more mature shells or whatever, clams or whatever they are, big ones, and you can feel the difference almost immediately. It also typically will show up a lot hotter on your reading as far as your transducer and stuff. But that's why I always keep that deep diving crankbait in the Carolina rig, because you can tell if you got the right rod set up and line and stuff, you should know. And that's why a lot of times when I'm reeling, I'm like, oh, about to get bit. I can feel that transition. You know, it's all a hard spot, but then all of a sudden you transition, you're like, oh, that's that nasty stuff, and then, you know, then you got the fish.
And that's why you use not a glass rod.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys want to fight? You guys want to fight?
Glass rod.
So I'm a lot simpler. I'm more
triangular,
like literally. So I do two things. One, if when I'm reeling it goes chunk, 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 that's shell. I don't care if it's rock or whatever. It's hard bottom. Yeah. I'm not there, dude. You guys are like up here. I'm down here with Ballz. So that's how I roll.
Whatever.
But the one thing that I do, and I don't know, you guys can tell me if the Garmins do this, because this is something that I found interesting. And I notice a lot more up here than I do in Florida. My down scan and side scan. So when I'm scanning something on that, everybody talks about using 2D to identify bottom structure. That's really great and it works, but it's a lot harder to do than the way I'm about to say. So on my Lowrance with down scan and side scan, if in my blue palette, if I get like, so I got my little mat here. If you start seeing a lot of black and like particliness in either your down scan or your side scan, that's got a lot of mush in it. If you start seeing a nice hard like white band on your down scan, or you get a lot of whatever color palette you're using on your side scan where the color is filled in, you know, it's just like a matte color across the thing, that's hard bottom. And it's an experiment that you guys can do if you guys got Lowrance's, like, or whatever. You guys can tell me if it does it with other grass, but you can idle like a creek channel, you know? So if you got a little creek that's maybe flat on each side, it's like 10 foot, and then the creek channel drops into whatever. That base of that creek channel, it's not just the fact that it's falling off that the color gets weird. Literally, the middle of that creek channel is gush. Like you can see, like it's mush because of the darker return. There are exceptions with hard fall offs. You do get some particly returns because your signal, is falling off the edge and it's not able to scan back into whatever you're trying to read. But how do your Garmin's read with that, or whatever other brand?
Yeah, same thing. And I've run birds too in the past, and it's that same thing. And that's why I always I think about like the heat of the image, because a lot of times when I'm running a palette, it's not that cool palette like you have in Lowrance. It's not like that blues or purples and stuff. It's usually like an amber or yellow, so it looks hot. It's like you're running down through there, it's a standard color, it's dark, it's nothing, and then all of a sudden it's like you have this really bright, whatever. If it's amber, it's like solid amber, almost yellow and white. That is your hard bottom area, and from there you can kind of discern what kind of hard bottom it is. Some of this has to do with just knowledge of the river and how that works. So if you see an area, if you're looking at your topographical map and you start seeing an area down there on a ledge that has contour lines that are spread way out, in other words, it's pretty flat, typically that's going to be a shell bed. Almost always there's a shell bed when you see those contour lines. If you're on an inside turn or you're on the peak of a hump, there's one area that the contour lines are spread out a little bit further. That's where your shell bed's going to be almost every time. And you can get up there and it's like clockwork. You'll get up there on top of it and you'll see the hot bottom, and there'll be hot bottom around there, but a lot of that's rock, right? That's the actual old river ledge. When we get up onto that flat where the current's nosing into it or pushing alongside of it, that's where the shell is going to be most of the time.
Dang.
So this is a question that I have, and this comes up a whole bunch, and I see it actually down in my Florida lakes as well as here. We're talking about like cranking those secondary creeks, or not secondary creeks, but just creeks off the main river. That's where I see the most of this goo bottom, and especially in depth ranges where I think there should be fish. In these creeks, say I'm at 15 to 20 feet of water, that bottom goes to goo. So what you see though a lot of times on your graph is right on that transition, there are gigantic balls of bait, or you transition to the goo and say 10 foot out into the goo. All of a sudden I'm marking like rando dots that don't look totally like bass. Like, have you guys cranked some of that soft bottom stuff? Have you guys cranked the transition? What's happening there in your opinion?
Okay. My opinion on that, because I see the same thing all the time. My opinion is like on the lakes that I fish, there's so much dang bait. Everyone says if you find the bait, you find the fish. To me, that's bogus. There's so much bait out there. You got to find the fish and where they're actively feeding on bait. So on a lot of that do nothing bottom, that dead area is where I see bait just roaming around throughout the day. And so that's where it comes into play, like what's the current doing? Which direction is the wind blowing? Because that's where bait is going to be that's broken up. Like if you're idling and you're seeing these big round schools of bait and stuff, that's no good. Nada. No go. If you start seeing it teardrop, misshapen, spread out, or little tiny pods of bait, that means that bait is under distress, right? It's getting pushed around by predatory fish of some kind. Typically, that's on the first hard bottom that's close to that area. I don't see them as much just out in that mush. Like bass on most of the lakes that I'm fishing, unless you're talking about like a blueback lake, with roaming spotted bass or something like that, they're ambush predators. So they'll literally sit around in the area that they want to sit in and wait for that bait to come to them because there's so much of it.
Yeah, I can't really comment on the mushy part. But I know like cranking transitions is enormous for us for smallmouth, or even just fishing transitions, especially on like ginormous rock flats. Like for us, you guys are talking about finding hard spots in the middle of giant sand flats or mud bottoms or clay bottoms. But I'm talking like you have giant, massive rock flats, and you're looking for a sand spot, and that's where those fish want to sit, or in the sand, or on the edge of the sand where it transitions into the pea gravel, then it goes into the boulders. Like finding those soft spots give those fish the ability to move around really easily, really freely, especially when they're super active. they don't have to kind of weave in and out of the rocks to get to what they want to get to. They just wait for it to come over the sand, and they can just get it there. And so for us, like, that gives them that setup and the ambush point to easily move around and feed.
Yeah, I was about to say, you know, what's funny is I've never focused on it out deep. I focused on it up shallow, though, like that slimy, nasty bottom, right? And something that I found is like when you're really shallow and you're just in that, just, you know, there's just creeks and things that are just nasty. I mean, they're just that goopy, nasty, brown crap. If you can find the first hard thing near that, that's where they're going to be. And I've noticed graphing, it's sort of the same thing when you're talking about, like, when you've got just old nothing bottom, the first hard thing near that old nothing, just goopy kind of bottom, that's where fish are going to be sitting, especially predatory fish. I think a lot of the times when you see those marks like in the goop, it's probably like catfish or something just milling around. You like just like catfish and carp mill around up shallow. You know, you'll see them just pushing around in the dirt and stuff like that. But then if you can find that one rock or that one dock post, or if you're out deep, you know, that one brush pile, whatever it is, that's where your predatory fish are going to hang out. That's kind of my experience with it.
I'll tell you, the only time that I've seen that different has been the last couple years on Chickamauga. We've had so much ledge pressure the last few years, especially with like some of the big tournaments that have come through. I have noticed some schools, like community holes, schools of fish, right, that you idle where they typically have been for the last decade. And there's a bunch of fish there, but as you continue to idle out, you know, a lot of times I'm lining up on these humps and stuff like that. And I'll keep idling out, and I'll just get into open space. And again, kind of that like softer bottom at the tip of the structure, and then just beyond another 30 or 40 yards in deeper water. Like, you know, typically for Chickamauga, our ledge fish historically are anywhere from 15 to 22, 23 feet, right? The last few years, I've noticed most of my better fish and my better schools that I've found have been anywhere from 28 to 37. And they're out off the structure, and they're out in that mush. They're out in like it, and I had to take a double take because I was idling through, and I'm like, this kind of looks like bass, but it's got to be catfish or like walleye suspended out here. And I fire a football jig out there on this one school a couple years ago, and I'm like ripping a football jig up just to see, because it's what I had in my hand. And dude stroked like 2 4-pounders in a row, and I'm like, what in the heck? What are y'all doing out here?
That's weird, man. That is something I've noticed. I don't know, Mikey, if you noticed it down in Florida or what, but like fish have got dramatically deeper over the past few years, like dramatically deeper. Like where we used to catch them in 21, and then it was like they were in 25, and then it was like they were in 35. And I caught a fish about a year and a half ago now out of 65 foot of water on a spoon. 65 foot of water on a spoon. It's not a joke. Like I found them 65 foot of water off of this break, and it was bass. And I don't know if that's just where those fish lived or what happened, but I caught one, and it died. It died on the way up. I mean, when it got to the boat, it was dead. It was like a 2-pounder. And I think the decompression killed it. But like, I caught that one, and I was like, okay, well, I'm done with that. I don't want to kill anymore. But like, I wonder is it fishing pressure? Is it changes in the environment? Is it changes in the biology? I mean, what is changing that is so dramatic that's causing a fish to want to be in almost 40 foot of water more than it's normally in?
Or is it electronics' ability to actually find these fish?
I think it's a little of both. I think it's pressure and the ability to find. Yeah. But I think that you guys these are cool conversations because they end up bringing up indirectly kind of interesting points. So 2 things. One, just to go back to long lining, if you're long lining for depth, like literally, dude, catch the fish and 2 seconds, put it back. Because that fish has a window of like 30 seconds, 60 seconds where it can get back down to where it was. And like its air bladder is like, it has enough strength or whatever, but you got to get the fish back. You can't go and dangle dick the fish and all that when you're catching them. My number is usually it's over 25 is a low, but like if you start hitting 28, 30, if you're putting that fish in a live well, you're killing that fish. And even if you gas them, I know a lot of guys can gas them and they know how to do that, but the way you catch them and how exhausting it is to bring it up, I am a hardcore believer that you gotta put them fish back like
Yep.
quick. The other thing too is talking about electronics, and I don't know if you guys have noticed it. So one epiphany I've had is how to see spots on downscan. Spots don't show up like dots. They show up as these weird little kind of flicks.
Wiggles.
It's almost easier to see them on 2D than it is on a downscan, which you think is counterintuitive. Well, when largemouth, and I don't know about smallmouth, I haven't caught enough smallmouth way deep to know, but when you start getting deeper than say 27, 26 feet of water, unless it's like a 5+, even 5s though, they'll show, like I'm talking like a 6+, 7+ pounder, it's going to show up like a spot. It's going to look like a little fleck on your down scan. So you got to be careful, because a lot of times you can scan something that's like, say 35 feet or something, and you're like, dude, there aren't any fish out here. Like, I've never caught a fish deeper than 20 feet of water, and it'll look almost like gizzard shad, like a thick pot of gizzard shad or something, because it shows up where the graph recognizes it, but it looks so flicky that you don't think it's bass. Well, if they're lined up like in a line, but it's flicky, those are freaking bass, dude. And the graph is just, even if you ever graphs at high return, like fast run and that, and even if you turn them up to 855, I played around with that, or 800, I'm sorry, versus 455, you still get this flicky return. That's where going to 2D and
always
using
use 2D that deep.
Yeah, when you get that deep, really having that 2D up to just double check, is that it's that simple? Is that an arc? Does it have a little, with my palette, I think it's the yellow in it. Does it have a little bit of yellow? It doesn't have to have a lot, but does it have a little bit of yellow? Those are bass, So just understanding that things are going to look differently on your graph when you start venturing into water. And I think 20, just to be simple, deeper than 25. Deeper than 25 changes the game with how your electronics see things and report them.
So I'm going to give up something that's kind of secret. Durds and I figured this out a couple of years ago. Fishing in the wintertime, we had to be fishing around mussels. Obviously, current, like that's the high current area, but at the same time during the winter, something about those mussels, there's like extra stuff around them. I don't know what the hell it is, but those mussels were the deal. You can only see them on 2D, and you can only see them on the 2D zoom. But what you would look for is you'd look for these areas where you'd have a little bit of mussel, and you can tell because you get like a half of a double return, but then you get like a fuzzy mark above what looks like the bottom. And it's literally like something coming off of the mussels, or some sort of growth, or some sort of something. And that's the only places you would catch fish, but that's how you can identify the good bottom for up here in the north for smallmouth. These ended up being like super predominant summer areas for me eventually. But you can go over these spots. You can only see it on 2D. You'll get, your bottom. You'll get like a small line, which is your zebra mussels, and then you'll get this like grassy looking, interference looking return, and you can see it on the 2D zoom. And then another good way to identify fish around rock, especially smallmouth, is using that 2D zoom, because rock, all of them look like fish all the time on the bottom. But if you use your 2D zoom and there's like a sliver of blue, it could be a tiny, tiny sliver of blue on the blue palette background, that's a fish. That's the only way you can really identify them.
2D is so important.
Down scan,
so underutilized.
Use your down scan, you use your side view. Like, you really struggle to see fish, but the second you go to that 2D, it's so good at giving you that separation there, especially when you're moving a boat.
That's the only way I can find fish a lot of times on these spotted bass lakes, like the Highland reservoirs. They're so steep. There's so many rocks, and they're standing timber. It's like half the time, if you're just looking at down scan and side scan, like it's fooling you left and right. You're like, what the heck is going on? What's that? What's that? Every once in a while, side scan, you can see the shadows, or you can see the hot marks over the ledge and stuff. But that 2D, so many times when those fish are like down on that rock and it's like boulders and stuff, it's saved my butt so many times just seeing that line under. I'm like, oh, you're not a rock. And
yes,
you're not a rock.
But all right, boys, I think that'll probably do it. What do y'all think?
I just want to ask a couple questions. Give me like your favorite one or two deep diving crankbaits that you guys like to throw on this stuff, and then I kind of want to touch on like, why do you think deep diving crankbaits catch big fish? It doesn't have to be like a long conversation, but I think like it's an interesting conversation to me. And then Mikey, why do you use that stupid ass snap on their crankbaits?
Oh yeah.
I hate you, Ben. Because snap is awesome. I'll let you guys go first, and then I'll go.
Caleb, go ahead, buddy.
All right, so my favorite baits, I like the Z-Boss baits a lot, just depending on the depth and stuff. But probably my all-time favorite, if I had to pick one, just for especially the last few years with everything being pressured, probably a DT20. I can just get that bait down. It's kind of silent. It's a little bit more finessey, I guess. A silent 6XD is another one that's kind of high on my list. Again, I kind of mentioned this in another video I recently did, but I stay away from chrome colors. I tend to go opaque, whether it's kind of like a bone or yellow color like that barfish, or whether it is absolute chartreuse and blue. That tends to be a good one for me. And then just a standard shad pattern like citrus shad. I've got some custom painted black ones that, Folks Customs does for me, and those can really play as well. Oh, here he is, the Sixth Sense.
I have to say mine's going to be, oh my word, breaking my computer there. Probably, Duo Realis G87 20A is one of my absolute favorites. That's a sneaky right there. That crankbait has a completely different action. It's got a completely different diving angle. It's got a completely different everything. It's also a silent bait, but it's a very small profile bait that can get into that 25 to 30 foot range depending on there it is. That's a Duo Realis. Yep. Amazing crankbait. And I love that color right there too. All of Duo's colors. One of the best colors they ever made was called Aqua Crawl. They don't make it anymore. I think they only make it in Japan. You can't get it here. But Aqua Crawl was freaking amazing. It was like this vermilion blue with a black back. And I don't know. I guess in deeper water, it just really popped because the fish would choke that thing. And then a Sixth Sense, the Cloud series, the 20 and the 25 foot diver. I fell in love with those a couple of years back. They kind of replaced 10XD for me, but then the 10XD is not very far behind it. And then again, when they get really pressured, DT20 is, you can't beat it, man. That balsa bait is just the dealio.
So I'll run through a few real quick. I'm going to selflessly plug a video. I'm literally dropping a video that's 25 minutes long that's from this angle, all about this stuff in depth. So I'm just going to throw my quickies at you.
Heck yeah.
Sixth Sense, it's Crush, C15, C20, C25. Can't go wrong. And I don't know what color this is, but like white and chartreuse works. So, 6XD, if you're just starting out, 6XD is affordable. Green Gizzard Shad is the best color. I don't care if you have shad on your lake or not. It works. And then I always try to have something that has breakup on it, neon bluegill, anything with bars like Caleb was talking about, something that looks like a brim. On some lakes it works, on some lakes it doesn't, but have it. And then the subtle stuff, Caleb, you mentioned the Azuma, the Z-Boss, totally subtle, weird action, one of the most unique actions on these crankbaits. But later in the season, these ledges are going to get beat up. You literally can't beat a DT20 or a DT20. Like and they got new colors too, dude. I don't know if you guys saw some of these.
I have been looking at them.
Dude, they got green gizzard shad now. And then they got one with like purple and all this freaking, it looks.
And you bought them all.
Yeah. Oh, dude.
I bought them all.
That's the other new one. Like they're bad to the bone.
Dude, that looks really good.
Yeah. Isn't that
big shad? Yeah. Big shad.
Cool? It's got purple on it. And so.
Iridescent. Yeah, dude. That's sick.
So but see, I look at my crankbaits like you guys though, where I look at them for vibration first. So I got them all divided up and watch the video because that's it's like aggressive trigger me to like, oh my God, I've seen 47 crankbaits. I'm going to run away from that, like that kind of approach. But Caleb, if you don't mind, I got kind of a cool graph picture. Can I share it, dude, real quick?
Yes. Just share,
Yeah. Let me get it on there. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's try to not share naughty stuff. Let's see, share screen. Let's see, let me share a window. All right. Are you guys seeing this?
I will add it right now. All right, boom.
Okay, so this is an example of a Tennessee River school of fish. And
it's a good looking school.
It kind of has the 2D in it a little bit, but I'm going to show you guys another one in just a second that'll show it. But you can see one thing I wanted to highlight. We were talking about 2D downscan, structure scan and all this. Another big player, like Caleb mentioned, is color palette. So I like the cold palette, the blue one that you can see, but I also like having what he kind of referred to as that hot palette. And this one doesn't do it total justice to show the differences, but you can definitely see if you look at that mid peak of that school. So it comes up to kind of like that tip. And if you look to the right of there, there's a giant, maybe like 4 foot off the bottom. But then right under him, there's 2 more, and they're a little harder to see on my blue palette. But if
I see them.
You can see them totally clear. And the same almost, this picture doesn't do it great justice, but the same applies to that little pot of bait that's off there to the right. You can see it on the 2D on the left side, and then you kind of see it on the blue, but I can attest to that red one, it showed it up like a whole bunch. So playing with color palettes kind of reveals a lot more than you would think. Let me scroll back real quick. Let me see. Tell me if the image changed, guys.
Yep.
Okay, so this is another example where this one has the 2D in it. You can see the arcs we're talking about, because sometimes you're seeing those little dots and you're like, are they fish? Are they not fish? Well, you see you have a structure, but then you can see the conglomeration of arcs that are over the top of it as well. And this one actually does a better job of showing how much that hot palette really defines some of the bait versus the blue palette, and vice versa. You see different things. So it's just no matter what kind of electronics you're using, there's always ways to kind of play with the vision, because it's just like a computer. It's interpreting and saying this is the way something should look, and the only way you can manipulate it is by changing the sensitivity. Obviously, that's a lot of playing. But if you change that color, it's amazing the different image you can get of the exact same picture.
Yep, that is so key.
Yeah, that's
a really good point. I'm glad you pulled that up.
Are you running, just side note, are you running 2 transducers? Or is that 1 transducer with
that's also 1 transducer, dude? Yeah, that's one. That's what I'm saying, where like you're getting different information. I used to have that old crappy hook graph or whatever that just had downscan. That transducer was actually different. That almost showed 2D fused with downscan, and it was awesome. I could see stuff on there that I don't see on downscan now, and I wish I would have never gotten rid of it, but it is what it is. It's on my old tracker. Some dude in Florida's got it. But it's amazing, though, with that same transducer, just changing those color palettes. And it applies on side scan as well. You see, you got to interpret it, but those white dots, some palettes, they're easier to see at some points. Other palettes, they're easier to see at other points. It's crazy, dude. And shadows are a big deal, too. Seeing shadows on side scan with different palettes, shadows show up a lot better on like your hotter palettes that you're talking about, because there's such a high amount of contrast. But some of the subtle little fish pods that you see on side scan, or maybe like a bar or something like that, show up better on the colder palettes, because there's not so much like in your face like granularity happening. It's a little more subtle, and then you see those like little white dots of those chunks. But yeah, that's my little 2 cents. Tune in tomorrow on Mikey Ballz Fishing.
Yeah. Hey, all the channels are linked below, guys, by the way. If you haven't subscribed to these guys, I don't know what you're doing and why you're watching me and not them. You're silly.
Yeah, well, we learned all this shit from you, Caleb. So
hey, man.
Yeah, right. I wish I was that cool. You're the guy that's sitting there like, oh, you guys know more than me. But, yeah, how many 40-pound bags do you have on a 10XD or deep diving crankbait?
Yeah, but, I mean, I figured those lakes out, and they're not that big. Like it took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But I'm going to catch 50, though. I got a true shot at – I told you guys that.
Dude, yeah.
If I have a shot at 50, it's literally going to happen next year in – I'm not even going to say when, but – it's
yeah, don't say what.
I will
just
have.
Tell me, and I'll be sure to be down there so I can net them for you.
Hey, dude, you're welcome to come down. I know your birthday line's up close there. Like we can run it, but there's a strong possibility. Not that means anything anymore, right? Because what's the top? What is
freaking Milliken dropping 60-something pound, whatever.
I can't even play with that, dude. So
we're gonna have to take a trip down to Texas next time there's a cold front. Good Lord.
Yeah, with everybody else though. Have you seen pictures of the road with that boat?
Oh gosh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, no, that's
moving. They got fully Guggenized, I know for sure.
Yeah, that's old news, dude.
Yeah. But again, talking about those cold fronts, dude, when those historic cold fronts come through and nobody else wants to be on the water and your guides are freezing up every cast, that's when you have to be out on those kind of lakes. And your lake's the same. Yep. Like if we get a major fish kill and a major winter in the next few years, that'll be the time that you catch 50 pounds, you know?
Yep.
Oh, Ben was out there. We literally caught 2 11-pounders on the nastiest dude, it was blow or try, and that was before Spot Lock, dude. Yeah. Like it was I actually like 1.0 on TikTok. That was fun. No, cast, bro. Ben, you're so helpful and kind-hearted. You're like, should I get the net? Mike, do you need Ben cast, bro? Freaking slang. We got like a 5-minute window, dude. Like,
yeah, dude. Mikey has this fish, and he's like, "Oh my god, it's like a giant. It's like an 11." I'm like, "Hey, I'll get the net for you, buddy."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Get back out there, cast."
Ben was so nice.
On the other side of the boat.
Ben's like, do you want me to help you reel? Like, how can I help you take care of this situation? I'm like, go, Ben. That was an epic moment.
That was one of the most epic things ever. I mean, I can't think of another video where 2 dudes doubled up on freaking double digits like that.
We called our shot too, and I didn't do good B-roll to actually show it, but like literally, dude, it was like 20 minutes, well, like 15 minutes. We idled them, we lined the boat up, and once again, that was a distance thing. We looked at where the point was. I lined the boat up based upon that. I think I used range rings in that one, but like we lined it up and we casted to like at them, and it was. That was luck. There was some luck involved there, but with the wind, that was stupid. I'm getting all giddy about it, dude. That was fun.
That's epic, man. That is epic.
So now I just want to know about the snaps. That's really all I came here for.
Oh, shit. I forgot about that. The snaps are awesome. You have no right to antagonize me.
No snap. Never snap.
Well, so 2 reasons there. So number 1, the snaps that I use actually work compared to other snaps. They're all welded owner hyper weld snap. I think I have the 48-pound ones. They're at Tackle Warehouse. You might have to get 65 now. I don't know if to carry the 48. So there's 2 reasons. 1, I used to use them a lot for long lining because I didn't want to retie a bait because we were talking about you get those 5-6 passes. That's it, dude. So I wanted to be able to have my box open, like right next to me, grab a new bait out of it because changing vibrations, going from a 6XD to a DT20 is like fishing a new school of fish, you know, like it's a different deal. The other thing that I found, and this is in talking to Ryan Salzman, who's a guide up here in Gunnersville, super cool dude. Go check him out on YouTube. He does some fun, like on the road for the tour stuff. But he said a lot of the guys up here use the snaps on their top water to get more action out of it. And I never really thought about it, but I think that same thing happens with the crankbaits, dude. Yep. You get some clicking because I don't take the rings off. I'm lazy, dude. I just clip to the rings. So that thing's like doing all kinds of crazy stuff and clacking and clicking and doing all kinds of
That's the secret. That's the secret to the 40-pound bag.
Yeah. Mikey, you need to try decoy egg snaps on deep diving crankbaits.
No.
You don't like them?
I don't know, but I'm not changing something until it's officially screwed up.
So the reason I say that is because of the whole more free range of motion. That decoy egg snap is just it's bigger. It's got a bigger opening. And I've noticed like on big swim baits that you can glide a swim bait further. Really? Walk-in baits, you can walk a walking bait easier. And I've noticed with deep diving crankbaits, it gives it just a little bit more free range of motion. I actually had a discussion, we won't say an argument, but a discussion with a guy one day because he swore up and down that the snap did absolutely nothing. And I know for a fact, not only in the action of the bait, but also fighting fish. You know, it gives that bait more free range to go back and forth, and you can keep fish. You can keep fish plugged better by running a snap in front of your bait.
It's pretty cool because like it goes back and forth, and then it hinges the wrong way, and then it breaks off, and then you lose the fish. Because that's the only experience that I've ever had with snaps. I hate those.
But I guess that's the one thing. Whether you're using the decoy or the owner, like you literally have to use a good snap. And I don't know how the decoys are set up, but mine don't have that. They don't. It's not a wire bend, dude. They're all welded, they're freaking. I've never opened one up. Dude.
It's caught a couple big fish on them too. So
it's a cross body.
I need to try it.
It's a cross snap, like a cross egg. You just look up egg snap, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'll look it up on Tackle Warehouse.
Yeah, like it goes over in like if you can open up a freaking decoy egg snap, you've hooked into like something a lot bigger and badder than we've got in freshwater. I'll tell you that much. Like
but
I've
that's
seen,
the thing. Like you got it. Like you can't use an eagle claw. Don't go to Walmart and try it. I guess is what I'm saying, because you're not going to end up happy. Because with all the tension that you put on it and all that, you got to have a quality component there.
The ones that I got from Harbor Freight sucked.
Yeah, dude, those owner ones, I don't know how much the decoy ones are, but they aren't cheap for a snap. Like it's like literally 5 of them for like $7, dude, which is not cool. But I've literally, and I only use them for top waters, and that's top water with like 30 or 40 pound braid, but obviously a soft rod, you know. And then this deep cranking deal, it's pretty much, and I'll shallow crank with them so I can swap baits. But I've never had an issue. I've never opened them. I've never bent them. Whereas I've bent, you know, the snaps they put on chatterbaits and stuff.
Yeah,
like I've bent a bunch of those. Yeah, they're garbage, dude. But these I've never had an issue with.
I might give it a shot again.
There's
even
terrible
though
reviews on Tackle Warehouse stuff. If you go on Tackle Warehouse and read the reviews, it's like a horror story. It's hilarious, dude.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah, I'm looking at them right now.
Like,
oh, dude. But you know, freaking 90% of those guys have like 65 pound braid and a flipping stick, and they're like, "I'm gonna throw a frog with this." And it's
Chad
like,
from West Virginia was punching with a 3-ounce tungsten, 18-inch crawfish with 85-pound braid and one of those snaps, and it busted right off.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. 2 stars.
That's funny.
2 stars.
All right, boys. I think that's all the time we have for tonight.
That's been fun. Let's
Thanks
do it
everybody
again.
for hanging out and watching. Thanks to these guys. Y'all need to go down and subscribe to these bros right here. They're going to be pushing out some content. I can't wait to see Mikey's video that he's posting. I've got another I'm going to do a specific long lining video myself coming up. So I think we're going to have this topic pretty well daggum covered. Hopefully Rudd will do one on his duo bait because I'm curious about that.
That's a
I want
weird
to see that. You need to bring it down here. We'll do some live action with it. I'm going to put it to the test.
That's a sneaky right there, dude. That bait, nobody knows. Like nobody. Like I don't even know anybody that owns one. And I picked those things. I got those things imported from Japan back in the day. Like 2013 is when I started getting those things imported. And they're,
I'm a bait guy, so I'm going to have a couple of them.
If you like those Azumas, those Z-Bosses, you'll like that because at least my experience, they roll the same. The way they roll on cover, they do this weird.
And I like that.
It's weird.
I like that.
And like you crank it, and it's not a. It's like a whoa. It's a weird.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like nothing. It's
weird.
They're funky.
Yeah,
they do catch them.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I'll catch you guys later. Hope this week finds you out on the water. I will catch you there. I'll see you on the next one.
Peace.